American Christian nationalism is no longer just America's problem. It is here, it is organized, and it has a plan for Britain. And if you think that sounds like a conspiracy theory, stick with me for the next 10 minutes, because the receipts are real. Let's start with the basics because this story only makes sense if you understand what we're actually talking about. Christian nationalism is not the same as being Christian. Let's be crystal clear on that. Millions of Christians across the world want nothing to do with this movement. Christian nationalism is the political ideology that argues a nation's identity, laws, and government must be fused with a specific version of Christianity. It's the belief that God chose your country and that secular democracy is a threat to that divine plan. In the United States, this movement is enormous. It fueled the January 6th Capitol riot. It's behind the overturning of Roe v. Wade. It's woven deep into MAGA's political DNA. Now, here in Britain, the instinct is to look at all of that and say, well, that's America, isn't it? We've got the Church of England. We're secular in practice. We don't do that kind of politics over here. That instinct? That comfort? That is exactly what these networks are counting on. Because while Britain was looking the other way, the groundwork was already being laid. And it goes further back than most people realize. So how does an American political religious agenda actually travel across the Atlantic? It doesn't arrive on a single plane. It moves through networks, funding, conferences, shared infrastructure.
I think it is, in many respects, an administration led by a person.
And it's been building for years. American organizations with deep ties to the religious right groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom, the Heritage Foundation, and a web of smaller evangelical mission networks have been quietly active in British political and civic spaces. They fund conferences. They sponsor research. They build relationships with politicians, media figures, and church leaders. The Heritage Foundation, which authored the now infamous Project 2025 Blueprint for Reshaping American Government around conservative Christian values, has had documented links with British right-wing politicians and think tanks. This is not speculation. This is on the record. Then there's the personnel. Steve Bannon has spoken at events with British far-right figures. American evangelical leaders have toured British churches not just preaching theology, but political theology. The idea that trans rights are spiritual warfare, that multiculturalism is a biblical threat, that the left is literally satanic. These are not fringe talking points in the American religious right, and they are now circulating in British evangelical spaces. And here's what makes this particularly effective in Britain. It often doesn't look like MAGA. It looks like traditional values. It looks like defending free speech. It looks like standing up for the church against a woke state. The packaging is British. The ideology underneath is imported. But let's talk about where this actually shows up in British politics, because it's closer to the mainstream than you'd think. Now, I want to be careful here because correlation is not causation, and not everyone in British right-wing politics is a card-carrying Christian nationalist. But the overlap is significant, and it's growing. Reform UK, Britain's fastest-growing right-wing party, has repeatedly platformed candidates and spokespeople with views that map directly onto American Christian nationalist talking points. Anti-LGBTQ+ rhetoric framed as religious freedom. Opposition to abortion access dressed up as protecting life and family. Suspicion of mainstream media and science as globalist corruption. Sound familiar? GB News, which has become Britain's closest equivalent to Fox News, has provided a platform for American religious right commentators and has hosted events with figures from the American evangelical movement. The culture war content that fills its airtime is not organically British. It is, in significant part, translated from American conservative media ecosystems. And in Parliament itself, there is a growing cohort of conservative and reform-adjacent MPs who use explicitly religious framing in debates about trans healthcare, sex education, and immigration. Several have attended American-linked prayer breakfasts and conferences. None of this is secret. It's just scattered. You have to join the dots. And most mainstream media coverage isn't doing that, which is part of why this story matters so much. But the political arena is just one front, because the other place this is taking root is somewhere much more personal, much more local. Your community. Here's the playbook, and it's smart. I'll give them that. The most effective way to shift a country's political culture is not through elections. Elections are slow. Elections are noisy. The real long game is culture, and culture starts local. Across Britain, there has been a documented rise in American-style evangelical church plants, congregations often funded or inspired by American megachurch models, importing not just worship styles, but political frameworks. These aren't necessarily extremist churches, but they are spaces where American Christian nationalist ideas about gender, about family, about the role of faith in public life are being normalized. In schools, there are ongoing battles over relationships education, over whether LGBTQ+ content belongs in the classroom, over parental rights battles that are being actively encouraged and sometimes legally supported by organizations with American Christian right connections. Online, British Christian nationalist content has exploded. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, there are British creators explicitly modeling themselves on American culture war influencers, using identical talking points, identical framing, identical aesthetics. This is not coincidence. There are shared networks, shared funding, shared strategy documents behind much of this. And the effect is cumulative. Individually, any one of these things seems minor. A church here, a campaign there, a YouTube channel. But together, they are shifting the Overton window, moving the boundaries of what's considered acceptable in British public and political life. Now I want to take a moment here, because this story deserves nuance. Not every person who holds conservative religious views is part of some transatlantic conspiracy. And there are genuine debates to be had about the role of faith in public life. But there is a difference between organic, homegrown religious conservatism and the organized, funded, strategically coordinated export of a specific American political ideology. And that difference matters. So what can actually be done? And is anyone fighting back? Yes. There are investigative journalists at Open Democracy, at Desmog, at The Guardian, and others who have been tracking these funding networks with forensic detail. There are civil society organizations sounding the alarm. There are politicians across the spectrum who are starting to connect the dots. But awareness is still dangerously low. The British public, by and large, does not yet understand the scale or the organization of what is happening. And part of that is because it's designed not to be visible. These networks operate in the gaps in think tank reports, in church basements, in private WhatsApp groups, in political conference fringe events. What Britain needs urgently is transparent foreign funding rules for political and civic organizations. Right now, the rules that prevent foreign money from influencing British politics are full of holes when it comes to non-party political activity. That needs to change. What Britain also needs is a media that takes this seriously, not as a culture war story, not as a left vs right story, but as a democracy story. Because that's what this ultimately is. The question of who gets to shape a country's values and whether that shaping is happening openly, honestly, and with democratic accountability is one of the most important questions of our time. And that brings me to you. Because this is where it gets real. Knowledge is the first line of defense. The moment you can name what's happening, the networks, the tactics, the pipeline is the moment you stop being a passive audience to it. So here's what I need you to do right now. If this video opened your eyes, share it. Don't just like it. Share it. Send it to someone who needs to see it. Because the algorithm rewards engagement and the people behind these networks know how to use it. Let's use it back. Drop in the comments, did you know this was happening? What surprised you most? I read every comment genuinely, and your responses shape the stories we cover next. And if you want to go deeper, subscribe and hit the bell, because this is not a one video story. We're going to keep pulling this thread. We're going to follow the money, name the networks, and give you the full picture. Because an informed Britain is a protected Britain. I'll see you in the next one.